Everybody is a philosopher. Just by dint of being a human being, you're automatically a philosopher. I actually think there's almost nothing you can do with a philosophy degree. Definitely not with an undergraduate degree. And you need a master's or a PhD to do anything, and then basically all you can do is teach. It's not like really a viable career arc for almost anybody. That said, I think it's probably one you can't really get a degree in logic per se, but logic, philosophy, debate, I think they're probably like the best courses you can take in college because they all involve critical thinking and rhetoric. Rhetoric is the art of intelligent persuasion, and critical thinking is the ability to think objectively and dispassionately in a systematic way, in a logical way, in a reasonable way about whatever. It's pretty much the best life skills anybody can get. Anyway, although people don't get degrees in philosophy, everyone is a philosopher at heart because human beings have big brains and we are especially designed to think deeply about the nature of the world. We have this massive encephalization of our brain compared to our body size. We're unique. We have language. We're unique. Sometimes they say other animals have language. Charitably, other animals have language. But when you talk about something as simple as recursion in language, which is the ability to say, I went to the temple with my wife and some of my kids for the program on Saturday at 8 p.m. that will also have a dinner attached. And we'll also hang out afterwards. And I drove fast on the freeway to get here on time. That ability to stack one prepositional phrase on top of a prepositional phrase on top of a prepositional phrase in order to make further commentaries on an initial idea which is introduced. And a 5-year-old can understand that. But the best AI translation software can't do that effectively today in 2021. Billion-dollar software can't do this effectively. But a 5-year-old can do it. That's because human beings are special. And what Noam Chomsky calls their language acquisition device is unique in all the species in the world. So yeah, whales might make sound to like tell each other where the plankton is or something like that, whatever. Dolphins, might like squeal if they're lusty or something like that to signal other dolphins that it's mating season, whatever. But it's nothing like what a 4-year-old can do. We were designed to think. And of course, because thinking is done in language. Think about it. Thinking is done in language. Therefore, language is essential for deep thought. You guys follow that? Does that make sense? I don't know if you're like, we're playing poker or something. I'm actually trying to figure out what's making sense or not. We think in language. Sometimes people think you don't think in language, you think in impressions. They're foolish. There's a voiceover narrative going on in your head at all times. It includes impressions and emotions, and it also includes actual sentences. Isn't it? You're still doing that mad now thing. If I'm not making sense, do this, and I'll keep going. I'll keep making my point. Otherwise, give me that little validation so I can move on to the next subject. We think in language. Because deep thought requires language in order to exist, because thought is done in language. And we learn how to think along with learning how to speak. And your ability to think deeply about a subject follows in the wake of you learning a language which allows you to have those thoughts. When I was living in Mexico and I started thinking in Spanish, I immediately got dumbed down tremendously because I had such a limited vocabulary in Spanish compared to my vocabulary in English. And that when I began to think in Spanish, I just had a lot less deep thoughts because I didn't have a language that would accommodate me. Do you follow this? Anybody who's bilingual and spent enough time in that other place that they start thinking in the other language knows what I'm talking about. So, we were designed to think, and therefore we're all philosophers, because what is philosophy? It's deep thought about the nature of reality. All philosophy begins with intuition. You have a hanger, a thread of an idea about reality, about your place in reality, about the existential dilemma, about who am I and why am I here and what's this all about. And then you start to think it through and chase it down and pull on that thread, and you're philosophizing. You may do it rigorously, systematically. That's the nature of things now. You may do it in more of a conversational style. That was the way it was done a long time ago. But everybody's tugging on those threads of intuition about the nature of reality. And they're trying to work it out, what's really going on here. When you read the Socratic dialogues, it seems like Socrates was a little bit of a lousy philosopher because there's so much back and forth. And it's the conversational style of how they made arguments back then. Nowadays, analytic philosophy has essentially turned philosophy into math, with rigorous mathematical proofs written in a mathematical language with ideas inserted so that you actually write equations alongside your ideas. It's much less of a conversational style where you think of this and you think of that and you go back and forth, and more of a didactic approach, and it's way more rigorous and efficient. And there's no, extra unnecessary redundancies in your thought. It's a major contrast. Right, Nick?
Right.
But irrespective of whether you take that more conversational approach or alternatively you take a more rigorous mathematical logical approach, everybody for all time has either informally or formally been philosophizing. It's literally what it means to be a human being. A functional human being with a functional intellect. And we start doing this young. I remember having existential angst when I was 5 years old. I remember laying in my parents' room at night, scared, ran into my parents' room. They got sick. Don't pick a winner, dude. Chill. I remember laying on my floor in my parents' bedroom because they didn't want to let me in their bed anymore because I was 5. And it was just like, wasn't to go anymore. So they let me sleep on the floor next to them. Which anyway, we lived in a carpeted home, so it wasn't that bad. And I was small. When you're small, there's just less body mass. So there's like gravity acts on you less. And You can get comfortable anywhere laying down. It's not that big of a deal, you know? You don't have like big shoulders that create that weird arc. Everything's kind of just way more favorable just laying on the ground and crashing out. But I remember thinking, I'm no safer in my parents' bedroom than I was in my room. They're gonna get old and die. My grandparents are old. My great-grandparents are super old. My grandparents are old. My parents are young. They're gonna get old like my grandparents. My grandparents are gonna be like my great-grandparents. My great-grandparents are gonna die, and it's gonna happen to me. And I remember having that existential angst from the basic, fundamental existential dilemma of time ticking away in the background, taking everything away, day by day. At the age of 5, because I'm a human, just like all of you. And we have this incredible insight in the nature of reality because of our faculties of reason, which are perhaps like just the greatest gift for us to be appreciative of. What makes it special to be a human being? Automatically, informally, just by dint of being a human being with a reasonably functional intellect. I don't know maybe it's 80 or 90. There's probably a certain threshold we have to meet up with in terms of IQ, raw intelligence. Below a certain threshold, you become a bit more animalistic and you're capable of less of this type of thought. Maybe it's 60, 70, I don't know where it lies. Below 70, you're mentally disabled. But I still think even mentally disabled human beings are infinitely more intelligent than animals. Perhaps not infinitely, but to several orders of magnitude more intelligent than animals. So I don't know where the threshold is. But most human beings are automatically philosophers because they can't help but ask the big questions of life. And so philosophy begins with intuition. And then you start pulling on those threads and thinking about it. There's other stuff you can do. You can push down those threads and try to numb it and drug it and sex it and hit yourself with neurotransmitters to block yourself from thinking too deeply about these things. But if you are not deadening your senses and deadening your faculties of reason, it's impossible to live in this world and not start to think about what the heck is going on. Because we are all, by definition, philosophers, it would make sense that the thing everybody would formally study in higher education would be how to rigorously and systematically and comprehensively philosophize, because that's what we're doing anyway. Therefore, we should all have a black belt in that subject. Does that make sense? Like, everybody should get in great shape because you have a body, so you might as well take care of it. Everybody should learn how to think clearly because you have a mind. You should learn how to think clearly. There's certain things everybody should learn how to do. Sewing isn't necessarily on that list. Nor is fixing cars. You follow? But thinking clearly and being fit should be on everybody's list. Therefore, everybody should have studied philosophy in college, even though there's no way to monetize it. Because it infinitely enhances the quality of your life when you can deeply think about things and not just confuse yourself. And you can work through stuff. Right, Nick?
Definitely.
Nick has a master's degree in philosophy, so he's my shill in tonight's class.
Not yet. I'm working on it.
Okay, working on his master's. All right, not bad. Don't want to give you too much credit. So all philosophy begins with intuition. And we should learn to chase down our intuitions about things, if only to prove them wrong. Just because you have an intuition doesn't mean it's reasonable or intelligent or defendable. People have all sorts of idiotic notions about what makes sense. Some people are into astrology, for crying out loud. But irrespective of whether your intuitions have merit or not, we should learn the art of pulling on those threads and thinking about stuff and being able to move from a confused. You usually have to move into a confused state. You start out neutral. Then as you have an intuition, you become more confused. Then if you know how to think about things, as you work through them, you hopefully become less confused over time. Materialism is the enemy of philosophy. Let me go ahead and define materialism for you. When I say materialism today, I mean sensualism. The idea that enjoying your senses is the goal of life. What's the primary thing people think of when I say enjoying your senses? Sex. Okay? But drugs are also sensual enjoyment because they give you the same neurotransmitter hits. Ultimately, touching soft cashmere is also sensual. Oh, that sounds kind of sexy when you say it. Yeah. But eating fine food, tasting fine things, and seeing, smelling, hearing beautiful things, those are all sensual experiences because it's literally you taking in the world through your senses and digesting it and enjoying that experience. Sensualism is the enemy of philosophy. And the more gross, and when I say gross, I mean the more basic and animalistic, eating, sleeping, mating, defending, those super basic animal activities, I'm going to call them the most gross. Hearing beautiful music, for me, the way I'm thinking right now today, don't bite your nails. I mean, bite your nails all you want to, just don't do it in my class. You want to scratch yourself. I thought we were doing the whole time, like cool, but I think you had your thing, I think you had your nail between your teeth. You were doing a little bit of that. You were doing that?
I was scratching, but
You
I
scratching?
it before. So.
All right. If you think about biting your nails, don't. It grosses me out. It's already hard enough for me to think through stuff. Why make me like work harder? Why make me think through stuff while you're grossing me out? Just be cool, bite your nails the rest of the week. Don't do what I'm doing in class. Don't pick your nose. Don't bite your nails. All sorts of weird stuff that's gonna gross me out. Just don't do it. Just for class. Then go back and do all the weird stuff you did. I'm fine with that. I'm not trying to like queer your house or anything like that. The really gross stuff, eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating, it's practically speaking, it's exactly what animals do. It requires very, very little deep thought. It's instinctual. We have an instinct to try to live, to defend ourselves. If you attack somebody, they automatically, even though it's a terrible, terrible reaction, to put your hands out. Because you just, your jaw is like the bullseye. You hit somebody's jaw, you wiggle their brain, and they get knocked out. Now you're defenseless, you can be killed. So putting your hands out in front of you is the worst reaction possible you can have. Because you just, your tools, which are designed to defend your chin, you're putting them out here, so it gets to come over the top and ring your clock. So, but even though it's a terrible technique, this reaction is an attempt to just automatically defend yourself and protect yourself. It's instinctual. Lust doesn't have to be learned. You don't have have to go to school to study lust. It just happens automatically. You get enough testosterone, progesterone, estrogen courses through your veins, and all of a sudden things start to be sexy for you, whereas previously they weren't. You try to explain lust to a 10-year-old, they just don't get it. But you don't have to explain lust to a 15-year-old, unless they're a late bloomer, because just automatically it's instinctual. It's instinctual. If you have a kid who's mentally disabled, but they're an adult, it always creates a problem because mentally they're like a 3-year-old. But in terms of capacity for lust and desire for sex enjoyment, they're like a 23-year-old. And it creates a problem because they're rubbing up against stuff because they got a 3-year-old brain, no internal boundaries, but they got 23-year-old desires. You follow? And eating and sleeping. They're just as natural as breathing, practically speaking. Not quite, but darn close. That's why I'm calling them gross. They're instinctual, they're animalistic. Listening to fine music, although also sensual and material, and therefore in the genre of materialism and sensualism. Listening to fine music, it makes you think of things. And you start to do a little mini philosophizing around it. So it's less grotesque. It might be fundamentally material and fundamentally sensual, but it's much less gross and instinctual and animalistic. Did you guys follow that? There is some music which is quite instinctual. Like when you get into EDM and like bass drops and like pogo stick rave music. That stuff seems to be quite instinctual and almost animalistic in its repetitive, gyrating kind of like, you know what I mean? It's almost like the audio equivalent of sex. It's like repetitive thrusting motion, but it's audio. You follow? And it does not create deep, profound thought. Rather, it creates pogo stick effects. People just jump up and down like idiots. You guys follow me? Right?
I like jumping up and down.
Okay. I mean, I'm not saying that the animalistic stuff isn't fun. I'm saying it's animalistic. Somebody's like, I like having sex. Like, yeah, no doubt. That's why I get in class, idiot. Materialism is the enemy of philosophy because it requires you to dumb yourself down to get into it. It's actually impossible to think about deeper subjects when you are sinking your teeth into something super materialistic. The very act of sinking yourself into something super materialistic requires you to dumb down your cognitive processes. Did you follow this? You have to rivet yourself to your body because you're engaged in a bodily focused activity which then functionally demands that you conceive of yourself as a material being so you can then forget the deeper thought and disport yourself in a way which just rivets you to your body and just enjoys your body without thought of what happens in the future. Like, just for instance, imagine how do people have, don't get me wrong, I don't believe in contraception, nor do I believe in promiscuity. I believe in getting married to one person and then having sex without contraception. But how do people get AIDS? Like, they gotta be lusty, right? But they gotta be so lusty they have unprotected sex. It seems like a relatively easy thing to avoid, right? Don't share needles, don't have unprotected sex, and we could quell the spread of AIDS. I don't know, 98% or something like that. There's still a few blood transfusions and maybe some weird accident, but it's pretty simple, isn't it? If you're going to have casual sex, make sure it's protected. If you're going to shoot drugs, don't ever share a needle. You guys following this? How do people forget that? They're so lusty. And they're so greedy for the drugs that they just stupefy themselves and think, I don't want to worry about it. Let me just get my fix. I'll figure it out later. If you think about the anatomy of a fall down, there's a watershed moment when somebody falls down from their integrity and they go over to the dark side and they sell themselves short. There's a moment where they decide, don't think about it. And they give up their guilt and they give up their shame and they embrace animalism. They stupefy themselves. Therefore, sensualism, animalism, materialism, to varying degrees, are the enemy of philosophy, because you have to forget the broader picture of what's going on in order to narrow your consciousness down enough to just focus on what's right in front of you, enough that you forget the bigger picture and you make foolish actions that are against your value system or your integrity and just make you your body temporarily in your mind. Did you guys follow this? Every one of you knows what I'm talking about, because all of us have surrendered to our desires at some point or another in our lives. And the same stupefying process occurs every time you do. You just want something bad enough, and the good advice and the conscience and the deeper thought and the working the math out and the figuring out, oh no, that's not in my best interest, and oh, wait a second, I should pull back. All that, at some point, you just decide, forget about it. You follow? It's the worst with the most gross sensual activities, eating, sleeping, fearing, mating. They functionally rivet you to your body because they demand full focus on your body as the only thing that you're worried about and conscious of. Other ones rivet you to your mind, but not your body. And real philosophy ultimately boils down to contending with the existential dilemma. I'm conscious. I have the capacity for love and thought. I desire to live forever. And I live in a world which is fundamentally, in every way, shape, and form, temporary. I have a desire for eternity, and I'm stuck in a temporary cage. I have a desire for unlimited enjoyment, thought, depth, and I'm stuck in a body and a world that limit me at every step. That's the existential dilemma, and all philosophy is an attempt to contend with and resolve that dilemma. Even hedonic, you're right, and so just enjoy as much as you can. Or minimize your suffering, the negative version of that. Or nihilism, nothing matters. whatever version you take, whether it's traditional religion or traditional atheism or somewhere in between, it doesn't matter. Every version is an attempt to make peace with that fundamental problem of existence. Do you guys follow this? For most people, until you get to be in your 30s, you can't even really contend with this issue non-theoretically. I became a devotee at the age of 16. I was on an ashram by the time I was 18. I did think about these things and made major life decisions based on my thoughts about them, but the whole thing was rather theoretical because at the age of 16, 18, 25, it seemed like I had an unlimited capacity to grow and enjoy, and my body placed very, very few limitations on me. I mean, there's certain limitations your body presents automatically. Freud's anal phase of existence isn't just about when kids discover their poo, but it's also about kids discovering that they're limited in this world and that they can't do anything. And if they fall off a ladder or touch fire, it hurts. And that their bodies are essentially fundamentally limited. That you're linked to the world, which is material, which presents, limitations. That's Freud's anal phase, when children begin to realize that they can't climb the top of the ladder because they might fall off. There's a certain age, 2 years old, 3 years old, somewhere in there, where kids stop just climbing the top of the ladder, fearless, because they know they can touch fire and get burned. They know they can fall off the ladder, they can hurt themselves. And then they become more cautious about the world because they realize the world is dangerous and that they're not impervious. They're no longer a magic snake. But up until your early 30s or something, the experience of the limitations of this world, like I said, some of them are there right from the beginning. But the deep awareness that I'm going to grow old and die, which is the essence of the existential dilemma, it doesn't hit you because it's just like your grandparents are dying, your parents are dying. But it doesn't hit you because you haven't started to grow old yet. So the whole thing is largely theoretical. As you move into your 30s, it starts to become more visceral and more obvious and more real because the first vestiges of it start to hit. Like my mom. My mom's 78. She was went to the hospital. She just got out. Just got a test. She just checked herself out of the hospital. She got urinary tract infection because she's a woman and women get urinary tract infections. Men do too, but not nearly. If you're a man, you got a urinary tract infection, raise your hand. I don't even know what that means. That means your penis hurt one day? I don't know.
I could have, once maybe.
It's not a maybe thing. You get a urinary tract infection, you know. They go, you have a urinary tract infection, you got to take antibiotics. No. You're like, it hurt me to pee one time. I don't know what caused it.
You can't pee?
Huh?
When you can't pee, what is that?
When you can't pee?
Yeah.
It's called, I think, a constipation or something. I don't know what that is. Some variation of constipation. If you're a woman and you've had a urinary tract infection, raise your hand. That's it? Really? All right. I thought it was everybody's had it. Maybe you guys just don't want to cop to it or something like that. Maybe it's too personal of a question. I counsel tons of girls, and every single one of them was like, I have a UTI. And it's I had to look it up. I didn't know what a UTI was. I had to look it up. What's a UTI? It's also sometimes the promiscuity. That's maybe why nobody's raising their hands. They're never. Anyway, my mom had a UTI. definitely not do the promiscuity. She's 78 years old. Hare Krishna. And she had low blood pressure. And she like got sick one day and decided not to go to the hospital because she was too sick to go to the hospital or urgent care. And I'm just like, Mom, you're 78. You can't not go to urgent care when you're feeling sick. You can't just wait it out. It doesn't happen like that. She's like, well, I've never had a problem. And everything always works itself out. And she woke up on Thursday and she had like a fever, blood in her urine, this and that, the other thing. Blood pressure super low. She like drives herself to urgent care. Like, you gotta go to the emergency room. Your blood pressure's so low, we can't even believe you're conscious. She gets to the hospital and they're like, how did you drive yourself here? Your blood pressure's so low. Like, I've always had low blood pressure. She's like, not worried about it. And they're freaking out on her. And she's got septicemia because she had to take care of the urinary tract infection. I got to give her IV antibiotics. It's like, no joke. And I'm like, Mom, you got to brush your teeth. She's like, hey, don't be melodramatic. And I'm like, you can't be lazy about this. She's like, don't you insult me. I'll hang up on you. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, I'm not lazy. I misjudged the situation. Look, Mom, what do you want to call it? Lackadaisical or lazy or misjudged or ignorant? Can we stop arguing with semantics for this and like recognize there's a problem? And I'm like, whether it was a brush with death or a serious health crisis or a potentially life-threatening situation, can we just acknowledge there's a problem here? And she's like, yeah, I just got to recognize I'm 78 and I can't just gut it out anymore. And I'm like, all right, cool. And then my wife is 40, just turned 40. She's doing okay. She's pretty good for 40. Pretty happy. I'm a happy camper. And if you're like, why do you care how your wife looks? Because marriage is a sexual relationship. If you don't want to have sex, you have no sexual appetite, guess what you don't need to bother doing? Don't need to bother getting married. Just have a bunch of friends. What's the big deal? No problem. You used to be able to divorce people for non-performance of spousal duty, which means your spouse wouldn't have sex with you. They changed that now to reconcile the differences, but it amounts to the same thing. It's in the codes for every state in the nation. If you think romantic relationships shouldn't be based on sexual attractiveness, then just imagine being in a romantic relationship with somebody who you found totally repulsive. And then when you do the math, it should take you about 5 seconds, if you're honest, that wouldn't work. Yeah, exactly, that wouldn't work. Romance depends on attractiveness. Attractiveness is a material thing, and therefore the people you're attracted to, it's a material, basic, animalistic attraction. We may regulate it in certain ways. There may be other elements added that we want to be compatible with the person. But imagine somebody you're totally compatible with, but you find them to be utterly repulsive. Would you be in a romantic relationship with them? No, you wouldn't. Because it's an absolutely essential factor. Now, at some point, you might become androgynous and start to look like each other. And your progesterone levels go down, and their testosterone levels go down. You end up becoming androgynous beings in your 60s or 70s or something like that. Provided you haven't gone through menopause or menopause. These are factors that have to be contended with. And so my wife was looking good at the age of 40. And she's like, I want to lose some weight. How do I do it? And I'm like, you gotta like go in the calorie deficit. You gotta expend more calories than you. I mean, it's just the same basic answer, right? Eat less calories and expend more calories. It's pretty simple. Caloric deficit and then move more. Essentially, that's what it boils down to. You move more and you eat less, right? She's like, well, why is it so hard? I'm like, because you're 40. She's like, it's like everybody else just eats like 2,200 calories a day and stays fit. I'm like, they're 23-year-old bodybuilders. Like, our first 4 children, no one could tell you had ever been pregnant like a week later. You'd lost all the weight, and you had a 6-pack again a week later. I'm like, but it doesn't work like that anymore because you're getting older. She's like, oh, that makes sense. She's looking at much like 23-year-old Instagram models who are all eating like 2,000 calories a day and working out and like doing great. She's like, why do I have to eat 1,500 calories, 1,300 calories? Why can't I eat 2,000 calories a day and like lose weight? Because you're 40. and your metabolism slows down because you're getting older. And mom, you got to go to the urgent care when you get sick because you're 78. And what used to be able to just knock out and not worry about it because your immune system's strong isn't the case anymore. The very nature of this world is that our old age in due course of time forces us to think more deeply about the existential dilemma. We can't get away from it because old age itself makes it normal for us to think about it. There's still stuff you can do. Take drugs, get surgeries, and try to pretend you're a child when you're an adult and dress inappropriately and behave inappropriately and just become like a laughing stock. But provided you don't do that, the nature of this world is that these issues become more prominent. They're more theoretical when you're young, and they're more visceral when you get older. Old age is actually your friend. It's Krishna's way of letting you know it's time to start getting ready to come home. It's a blessing. It's not your enemy. For a materialist, it's the worst thing ever, and you stave it off. Devotees, spiritualists, they can grow gracefully because they took the trouble, even when it was theoretical and difficult to viscerally wrap your head around, to force themselves to think deeply about the existential nature of reality, which our huge brains and capacity for thought allow us to do. Even when our body is going in one direction, our heart and our head can go in another direction, and we can deepen ourselves even though it's largely theoretical. Did you guys follow that? Even though you don't feel time ticking away, even though it's not viscerally present. Of course, you can have OCD and obsess about the slightest wrinkle or this or that, but that's not what I'm talking about. That's just like some OCD shit and artificial standards of beauty. I'm talking about the visceral experience of growing old, of loss, of death, of suffering, that naturally takes place during the course of everyone's life. And how it automatically makes you more pensive, thoughtful, and considerate and deep. Prior to 30, it just doesn't happen. Sometimes your parents die when you're young, or something like that. You have some catastrophic loss early on in life, out of the normal chronology of one's life, and it deepens you and makes you more thoughtful earlier on. But even then, people usually end up trying to drown it in various ways. At some point, it's not drownable because it's just like your life. And you have to expend larger and larger amounts of energy to try to not think about what's so clear and present. You guys got this? As you get older, it just becomes so obvious. You really have to stupefy yourself. You really have to fight to dumb yourself down. Because it's time to grow up. It's time to think deeply. It's time to move forward. It's time to become a more considerate, thoughtful person who thinks naturally about the nature of their existential dilemma. That becomes more the norm. You can still be an idiot. It just takes a ton more drugs and sex and money and materialism and willful stupefying of yourself to maintain the illusion. Are you guys following us?
Yeah.
So while we're young, which most of you are, we should force ourselves to regularly think about the nature of reality. How we want to die, what's most valuable, what life's really about, who am I fundamentally, what's the nature of reality, does God exist, how would I cultivate a relationship with God, what's a life worth living, what does integrity look like? We need to force this conversation because when you're young, animalism and sensualism is more natural. And if we become addicted to that way of living when we're young, then when we get older, it's harder to make the transition. Whereas if we learn these lessons when we're young, and we even do it when it's theoretical, then when it becomes visceral, it's easy street. Did you follow that? If you're doing the right thing when it's theoretical, then when it becomes visceral, it becomes like, I'm growing older, I feel it. Then it becomes way easier. Your body starts to cooperate with you. You see old devotees. They look ecstatic. They're glowing. Toothless old sadhu, glowing like the sun. Why? Because they spent their life cultivating spiritual ways of enjoying the world. And therefore, as their body disintegrates, they can just move forward at ever-increasing speeds as their body provides less and less of an obstacle. And the reality of their existential situation becomes more and more apparent, and they've cultivated deeper ways of experiencing reality beyond the animalistic sensual world that most people are stuck in. Do you guys follow this? And so we have a verse. Ayur harati vaipumsam. Ayur harati vaipumsam. Certainly, vai means certainly. Pumsam, for a person. Ayur harati. Harati means it takes away. That's where you get the word Hare from, Hare Krishna. Ayur harati. It's a verb, present tense. Singular, third person. It takes away. What does it take away? Ayu. What does Ayu mean? Your life. That's where you get the word Ayurveda from. Ayu means life. Ayur harati vaipumsam. It takes away your life. What? Udyan. Udyan. Astam. Shayana Sao. The rising and setting of the sun. Udyan, rising. Astam. And setting. Ayur harati vaipumsam. Udyan astam. Hiyan asao. This rising and setting of the sun takes away someone's life. Right? Whether we experience that or not, it's happening here. As you get older, you feel that the rising and setting of the sun is taking away your life. When you're younger, you don't feel that. But irrespective of whether you feel that or not, it's happening every day you live, no matter what. On my Instagram feed, I follow a bunch of Stoic philosophers because that's the kind of stuff I like to show up on my feed. And they have a calendar they sell, which is every week of your life. So they have like 100 years of your life. It fits on just a simple calendar like this big in a week. So it's, whatever, 52 weeks times 100 years. It's like 500 dots, and you start checking them off. And so, right? It's super macabre, right? It's like a meditatio malorum, like meditating on the bad, And it's like a memento mori, remember death, that movement in art and literature that was really popular during the Middle Ages, where you would see a beautiful painting and there'd be a skull in it. You'd be like, what's that skull doing there? Remember death. They're trying to remind you not to get too wrapped up in the material world. Or meditatio malorum, meditating on bad things happening. So you don't get too comfortable in the material world where you start thinking it's all rainbows and unicorns. Or pre-mortem, in the corporate world, where you start thinking about what could go wrong, even when things aren't going wrong, so you're prepped for it. What's the ultimate thing that's going to go wrong? That's right. And the rising and setting of the suns are taking away your life. Whether you're thinking about it, whether you feel that or not, whether you feel like I can just go on forever or you don't, it doesn't matter. It's happening. And we think, I can waste 5 years. I'm only 25. I waste 5 years, what's the big deal? I mean, number one, you may not make it to 30. You waste 5 years. I got a bunch of friends I ran with as a kid, died young. All sorts of things can happen to you, and you die young. You got a bunch of friends died young? I got a bunch of friends died young too. So that whole YOLO thing doesn't always work out for people. There's one person, they're driving like 150 miles an hour on the road, and they texted their friend YOLO, and then they got in a car crash and died. I read that on Instagram, so I know it's true. No, I actually read it on the Health Post, so it is actually true. And stuff happens. But you waste that 5 years, you're 5 years behind the curve. You got 5 years of catching up to do. It ain't so easy to catch up. It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. We don't generally make 50-year-olds into devotees. We make 20-year-olds into devotees. And then by the time they hit their 50, they're rock stars. You make a 50-year-old devotee, it's very rare. It's hard. Hard to come to Krishna consciousness later on in life. Too set in your ways. There's exceptions. But as a general rule, young people become devotees, and then we try to keep you and make you old devotees. Ayuharati Vaipumsam Udyan Astam Hyana Sa. Tasyarte Yakshana Nita Uttama Shloka Vartaya. Tasya Arte, Rite, except for one. Except for who? Yakshana Nita, the person who spends every moment, Uttama Shloka Vartaya, describing the activities of Uttam Shlok. Uttam Shlok means the Lord who is described by beautiful verses. Shloka means verse. Utta means the best. The person who's described by the best verses, Vartaya, that person's activities. If you yakshana, nita, if you utilize every moment describing the Supreme Being's glories, then Rite, you're an exception to the rule. What rule? That the rising and setting of the sun steals away your life. How do you become an exception to the rule? You don't. Your body dies. But you're practicing the art of living beyond your body. You're practicing the art of going to a deeper place. You're practicing the art of living a more profound, non-material spiritual existence. And therefore, you functionally become aloof from and transcendental to the material world, which takes away your body, but can't actually take away your consciousness. And as the body starts to lessen its ability to function in this world, it doesn't matter because you've seen the truth, you've seen beyond the illusion, you've seen the reality, and you're just moving towards it. And you can even speed up when you get old. And you're not afraid. We have a radical idea. What's our radical idea? Human life is special. What's our idea? Every soul is meant to love God. Jiver Swarupoi. There is an eternal form of every living being. What is it? Jiver Swarupoi? Krishner Nityadas. He is the eternal servant of Krishna. That's our radical idea. And he's Veda Ved Prakash. Each individual soul is both similar to and different from divinity. We're eternal. We're not actually into this world. We're above this world. We're beyond this world. We got sunk into this world in a virtual reality game, coupled with amnesia. And we start believing the virtual reality game. But you can wake up from that. Take the red pill. And you can wake up from that. And there's another existence you can be a part of. How do you get there? You fall in love with Krishna. You fall in love with something beyond this world, and that pulls you up and pulls you out, and you start to see things from a broader perspective, from a higher vantage point. How do we do that? We talk about spiritual subjects. We think about big topics like the nature of the divine, like the activities of heaven, like the ultimate potential of the soul. We force ourselves to pull on those threads that most people never even think about. And we, in earnest, on a regular basis, uplift ourselves by going big, challenging ourselves. It's like a Spartan race for the soul. It's heroic. It's adventurous. It's miraculous. And then you see glimpses and visions of the reality, and those things inspire you and give you strength so you can keep your head when everybody else is losing theirs. And you can do the right thing even when it's not popular. And you can stick to your guns even when the whole world is indulgent. And you don't lose by doing that. It's hard in the beginning. Who said spiritual life is supposed to be easy? Why would seeing the cause of all causes and seeing, the dawn of all creation and seeing the beginning, middle, and end of all things, why was that supposed to be cheap and easy? It might be simple, but why should it be easy? Why should you have to put some skin in the game for that? What does it mean to be a devotee? It means you embrace an idea. My fundamental nature, why I exist, is to love God. And therefore, while I'm in this world, I'm going to make sure I go and touch that infinity on a daily basis, on a regular basis. I'm not going to do things which are poisonous to that. Maybe I'll do some things which are minimally antagonistic, but nothing which is actually poisonous to that. I'm going to construct my life in such a way where I'm regularly touching that, regularly thinking about that, regularly pulling on those threads, regularly being a philosopher, regularly going deep, going big, going high. Getting a vantage point, getting a perspective. And then time becomes my friend. Old age becomes my friend. Because I didn't buy into the illusion that I'm the body. Not philosophically, not functional. Most of us haven't bought into the illusion we're the body philosophically. But if you buy into the illusion that you're the body functionally, by wrapping yourself up in indulgent sense gratification, which drags your consciousness automatically down to the lowest level, you're not a devotee. You're a materialist. I don't literally mean that. You can be a fallen devotee, no problem. But you're not going to be able to make near the kind of advancement you could make if you actually lived your values. Okay. That's those are my thoughts today.